Right, this is the short version. I've done an hour's lecture already on YouTube about the potential for fraud within global warming. People have said it's a bit too long, I haven't got an hour, so what I've done is I've taken the basic points, most important skeleton where you can put the meat on in any way that you choose, and believe me, people have done, and the main lecture is linked to this one, and all the sources are on understandingfraud.blogspot.com, where I've written it all out in about 50 A4 pages. So this is a summary, but you know, use it to work out the rest. Okay, you start off with the theory of global warming, just stripped down to its basics. Now, global warming is actually what it's called, because without global warming, climate changes, which is part of the PR propaganda, whatever you like to call it, I'll get into in a moment, but the actual phrase is climate change from global warming. That is the complete phrase, and it's been abbreviated to climate change probably because it stopped warming about 15 years ago. So it's global warming, because without the warming you can't have the other problems, and one is completely dependent on the other. Now, it's not just a scientific theory with a possible man-made solution, but a theory which has completely transformed, sorry, it's my writing here, it's not typed out, it's handwritten, but it makes it all the more exciting. Transformed the world government and political economic structure completely in ways which could never have been possible without it. So, problem, reaction, solution. If you want to create a solution which nobody would ever vote for or dream of, if you create a problem which then needs, you know, the people say, we need this to happen, and what are you going to do about it? We'll demonstrate for higher taxes, which is exactly what people have been doing through this. Can you imagine that being done otherwise? So it's problem, reaction, solution. All these economic and political changes have been brought about purely through the threat of global warming. So the science has been done to death and had little effect on the policies, despite new data coming up the whole time. So I'll just quickly summarise it to say that all these talks of, you know, many degrees temperature rise by 2050, 2100, etc., with the rising CO2, which is the only thing which is constant. It is rising like that, and it's rising despite everything that's been done to stop it, of course, because we need to heat our houses and get from A to B, and that's the only way to do it. But that's something you can think about. Why would they carry on doing it when it's not working? But using the IPCC, the UN climate change lot's own figures, CO2 started at 260 parts a million before. We got a helicopter, don't worry, you'll still hear me. CO2 started off at 260 parts per million before industrialisation, and it's now at 390, just over that, which is 50% increase since 1850. Now, the temperature has increased by a total of 0.8 degrees since then. CO2 is supposed to have 1 centigrade at 260 out of the total 33 above space. Double that, of course, you get 2 centigrade. Now, the only thing which changes that is this strange theory of James Hansen that evaporating seas will go up and create water vapour, which will in turn act like a greenhouse, which is much stronger than CO2, and have runaway climate change. No evidence for that in the past or the present, and of course water vapour goes up in the water cycle, forms clouds, blocks out the sun, keeps it cool, and then rains. So, you know, just saying that the water vapour is going to evaporate and stay there is slightly against what I learnt in O-level physics while he's got a PhD. So you can see the foundations of this are not what you would think. So anyway, we've got a 0.8 centigrade rise since 1850, and the IPCC themselves say that only half of that isn't natural and down to CO2, which makes, if you double the CO2 to 560 parts per 520 parts per million, then it would be about just under a degree centigrade, which the IPCC have said anything up to about 2 to 3 is quite safe. So we're trying to stop nothing happening, because nothing is happening. Yet it all goes on. So this paves the way not for science, of course, but for fraud, because why would you keep on something which is so completely dodgy, so completely different to what the media and the governments all tell you, when nothing's happening? Certainly the climate isn't changing. The climate can't help but change because that's its nature. Anyway, The government system that has changed, I'll go into with all the possibilities for fraud nicely built into it, and it's not just fraud, it's power broking, because some people like to have power and some people like to have money and some people like to have both. You know, you get one with the other, it's just a matter of personal preference, but the government of course is power, and then when they retire they make a fortune. If they can do any nice mafia style deals on the side as they go along, of course, then their families do very well from it, such as governments legislating for wind farms and then investing in them, which our government does and many others, and so does the BBC. They've actually got the Climate Change Investment Fund for that very purpose. So the UN is essentially unelected, as is the EU. People say, well, what about the European Parliament? Well, MEPs only discuss what the European Commission, which is pretty much 12-year unelected civil servants who have merged the separation of powers, the legislature and the executive, so that they make their own laws, mainly in secret, and the MEPs just talk about them and get paid a lot for doing absolutely nothing. So the EU have legally got these carbon restrictions based on UN recommendations, and we now have the same around the world, wherever it's imposed legally or voluntarily, of carbon taxes, carbon credits and the trading of such. It's going around worldwide, and the UN have already said that just optional countries isn't any good. We have to do this problem, as they say, together, otherwise nothing will happen. So they want a world carbon tax. In order to have a world carbon tax, you do actually have to have a level of world government, binding government, based on the UN itself. So they would like a one world government, and they would like a carbon currency. All this is on my website, it all has the sources and published papers and everything, no secrets here, just the media won't tell you, so I have to. So the one world carbon related currency is going to be very different from the money we've got, because if I put a pound in my pocket and I get my trousers back next year, oh, I've got a pound in them, wonderful. Even if I had a pound note, the bank would change it for a pound coin. Not with carbon credits. You will get your carbon currency for a year, and if you don't use it, it will wear out, so there'll be no personal wealth, and just imagine the consequences of that. We'll be slaves, it'll be feudalism all over again. Greatest planned economy ever in the world. So the carbon trading system seems strikingly familiar to me when I read about it, and of course the Enron energy credits, where they put future profits in the accounts to attract investors, and then turned out there weren't any future profits. They called them energy credits, and I thought, my goodness, these are very similar. And they turned out not to exist, end up in convictions from fraud. Now, Bill Clinton and Al Gore met Ken Lay, who was the chief executive of Enron in the 90s, before it was illegal and found to be fraudulent, and developed carbon trading based on the Enron figures. So while Enron had been convicted, and rightly so, of fraud, carbon trading carries on legalised, and Al Gore has made absolute billions from it because he pays himself carbon credits to his own company. And carbon trading is regulated, but carbon credits aren't. So if you go on holiday and pay money to your airline plus a carbon credit, there is no legal requirement for them to do anything except keep it. That might change soon, but why would you have a system like that at all? So that is what happens with the financial, what we would only call a Ponzi scheme, because nothing's being created, nothing's being added, they're just moving the money around from one place to another. The spin-offs on the economic side are an industry in themselves. Landowners and homeowners are paid to host wind and solar arrays at many times the cost of the energy. 10 times the cost of the feed-in tariff on the solar in Britain at the moment, which was going to be reduced, but the court said they couldn't, so they were enforcing their own laws quite nicely to keep it going one way or the other, looking like they wanted to change but not being able to with their own court, who were told what to do by who is the question. You can work that out for yourselves. And if you have a huge amount of land, such as the royal family, for example, Prince Charles and Prince Philip Prince Philip doesn't actually. He created the World Wildlife Fund to put all these agendas. Agenda 21 from the United Nations describes sustainability, and the ICLEI tells the governments at a local level how to put the sustainability into practice. So all these wind farms and solar are part of sustainability, just to put it into its political context. And anyway, the royal family and the governments and aristocrat, anyone who has huge amounts of land can now rent it out to the government, who are fined more than the subsidies if they don't do it. So they have to do it under EU law throughout the EU to have wind farms. And these wind farms pay a 10-year bond at an interest rate of 52.5%. You put in £1,000, you'll get £5,250 out at the end. Multiply that by 100, so you'll get a million. You get £5.25 million at the end of it. So that's where our taxes are going. Nothing has been created, because wind farms actually cost as much or more to maintain and build and look after than they will ever produce, because the wind is limited and they can only work at a very narrow band of energy, yet they only exist, as does the solar, with our subsidies, and they would not otherwise. So there is a huge industry. So when they talk about green jobs, they're absolutely right. They are green jobs, but based on moving the money around rather than actually doing anything productive. The advertising and promoting, the PR, uses standard propaganda methods, now called PR rather than propaganda, because the Americans picked it up from the Soviets, who originally got it from Goebbels, who invented it as part of the Nazi propaganda machine. So Goebbels has said things like, take familiar words and use them in different ways and make phrases from them and make up new words so that they are repeated often enough to become part of the language. Truth is not important as long as it is effective. So you change the meanings of words like carbon and pollution, and then make new phrases like carbon footprint, green jobs and clean energy, etc. And you have the communication method which covers everything. This takes the form of post-normal science, developed by Funterwitz and Revetz, who said that in these sorts of situations the cause far outweighs the requirement for truth in its description and promotion. So no accuracy, the cause is greater than the means to use it, whether you're telling the truth or not. And there are many lectures on this. One of them even got into the Guardian newspaper, so you can read all about post-normal science. There are 2 or 3 very nice pieces about them online, and I've quoted all the best bits in my websites. So the point is that this is called post-normal science, but is it actually science? Because this is actually running science as we know it now, certainly climate science. Now climate itself is a fascinating thing, because climatology was not really a science at all until the 1970s, when the Climate Research Unit was created at the University of East Anglia by, of course, energy companies themselves, who saw a great potential in this, because up till then it was meteorology, weather forecasting, short term up to 3 months, because people needed to know the weather, especially coast guards. But no, it's climatology, long term weather, past, history and future, where it's based on these computer models trying to model the climate as if it was a simple closed system, which it's not. It actually gave rise to chaos theory, and you all know about chaos theory. It's too complicated, too many inputs to see the output, but they do it nonetheless, and people are taxed on it. So, you know, where's the opportunity for fraud there, I wonder. So anyway, Shell, BP and many other energy companies funded the CRU, and as did the usual suspects like Greenpeace, which became the leading source of world policy along with NASA, which of course big oil is OPEC, while the companies themselves like Shell and BP, who do fund green energy a huge amount and green propaganda, and fund all these scientists and units and goodness knows what pressure groups to do their dirty work for them, because they are selling energy for a profit. Any energy will do, and if it's subsidised they will do even better from it. Now, restricting fossil fuel, which Obama has done in America by restricting anything through the EPA, just turning the light on, has been obviously one effect of reducing supply if you have a standard demand which can't change, because of course you can't tax energy because it's an essential, people have to have it, what will happen? The price will go up. So everybody's oil reserves, OPEC's oil reserves and all the other big oil that really is just oil are doing incredibly well from it, because all the oil and gas is worth a lot more now than it was before, and they're doing nothing else except selling it, and they can't do anything but sell it because there's no alternative. Believe me, if there was an alternative they wouldn't exist. So they'll continue to fund the research because it's making them an absolute fortune over and above what they would have got before. Finally, we have the verbal evidence in print from the propaganda machine, the policy making machine who actually developed this in the first place. Now, I've traced it back to 1967 to meetings with James Lovelock, who said that the Earth would be better off without humans at all, certainly his followers do. So Agenda 21 is the United Nations legal bit, which is all published online. You can read about reducing the population through any means they can and reducing the effect we have on the planet. And the ICLEI applies this at local level, local government, and you have a framework which goes above and beyond all local things. So it doesn't really matter who and what you vote for. If the UN are calling the shots and the EU are doing it for them within the EU, where it's legally binding. So the Club of the Isles, headed by Prince Philip, and creating the World Wildlife Fund, and the Club of Rome, and George Soros now has various PR groups such as MoveOn.org and the Environmental Media Services, just two of the four PR groups that he's owning, which promote this sort of thing from the Club of Rome. They all happily link the environment to what they now call the New World Order, which is not what I call it, what they call it, which is world government in the order that they wish. And how uniting man itself through perceived global warming, associated chaos, will be the key to open the New World Order, as reiterated by people like Mikhail Gorbachev since then. Now, if you read the Club of Rome report in 1991, you will see that they quite openly say that it's the threat of these things that will unite mankind against itself. So divide and rule, make mankind hate its own very existence, and you will create an atmosphere where the fear will create so much chaos that nobody will be able to think about what they're doing, except the few of us like me who are immune to this virus, and just see the figures do not add up, and can't see the fuss about slightly different weather. Anyway, understandingfraud.blogspot.com is there. My other lecture is there. I've managed to squeeze this into a much more manageable 10 minutes or so, and basically what I will say is that all the details are there, and the sky's the limit, because you can't make something from nothing. Carbon trading, carbon credits, all the rest. What are they actually creating? You can't own the air, you can't deliver it, and you can't actually change anything from making a transaction on CO2, can you? What does it add to the economy? What growth is there? So that's a Ponzi scheme, it's a pyramid scheme, it's all about moving things around, as is the green energy, because the renewables, the solar and the wind, do not produce, they cannot produce. The sun is too diffused to produce enough energy to really ever do more than it can, unless you get some miracle substance which converts a tiny amount of light, because half the time it's not the sun, because, well, not directly because it's cloudy, so you get the reduced light. It still has to be in a sunny area. It doesn't work at night when you need it, and you can't really store the stuff, so you either use it or lose it. So at night when you actually need it the most. Wind only works within a very narrow range, and it requires conventional power stations to be on permanently on standby, whether they're producing energy or not. For the numerous times they don't work, and you can't get more out of a wind turbine than you put in. So even if the wind was going permanently, which it can't and it doesn't, it could only convert a certain percentage into energy. The storage costs are phenomenal if you can store it, and everything has to be converted from DC to AC as well, which isn't cheap. The maintenance alone, the brakes, wind farms actually use power, they have brakes and they have motors to turn them to the wind, so again they actually have to be hooked up. So you know, they have suggested that the best way to get them turning is just to get electric motors and get them turning all the time, so you'd have a complete system just like the money, where the same energy and the same money would go around in a circle, and nothing would ever be produced, because you'd just be recycling the same stuff and creating nothing. So I think that pretty well sums it up, and